Alright, so this will be kind of a shorter video that goes over some of the extra features that we could maybe use SketchUp for, and some of maybe the more practical uses of SketchUp to use in combination with other software, or just maybe for different purposes. One being is that SketchUp does function like a lot of different CAD software, and so it can communicate with other pieces of software like Photoshop, Illustrator, and AutoCAD as well. And so with that, we actually can import in different AutoCAD files. So once we get more familiar with AutoCAD, and you can use that to kind of lay out some of your 2D line work, which is, hold on, my microphone's getting all tangled around my neck. So we can go into File, and we can actually import in different CAD files. So I don't know what this is. I'm curious as to what that is. Don't know why I called it fishbowl layout. So it was kind of just, never mind. But if I go into import, and I can import in maybe like an old 2D CAD file, it'll kind of tell me that, you know, there's 418 lines in here. There were some things that it couldn't put in, but that's okay. And if I orbit myself around, which I clicked on the wrong thing again, I can have a kind of 2D layout of something that maybe I've already drawn in CAD, and then work my way from there. And so all of these lines are going to be recognized points that I then can work from. So I can use my line tool then to kind of go around, and let me pan over, and without having to take measurements, because I would have already measured everything in AutoCAD, I can just kind of easily frame out my different entities and where everything would be. Oops, I orbited when I meant to pan. Like I mentioned, I do that a lot. And I can even, you know, frame out for my windows. I won't sit and do all of them, because I don't want to take up all of your time today. But I'm going to take up some of it. Sorry. Sorry to bug you with education. And so I can start to frame out different parts and pieces, and they'll still act just like anything else when I go to extrude it, or to rather push-pull it. So I can push-pull it up. I can type in specific amounts that I want to go up. I can then, you know, bring this window piece up 2 feet, and then I would have to draw in a little rectangle here. Delete that face. And ew, why did it fill it all the way? I didn't want it to fill all the way. Ugh. Maybe I wouldn't want to do it that way. Maybe I'd want to fill in this way instead. And so that would be 1'4". And then I could push-pull this over to meet here. I could pull this one up and this one up to meet the face. So like if I already had a lot of 2D line work done in AutoCAD, rather than having to redo an entire building, I can just copy a lot of that line work from an existing 2D CAD drawing, or from an existing Illustrator drawing as well. Just really anything that uses 2D line work. A good kind of way to check if it's going to get exported as line work like this did. So because this is exported as line work, that's why I have the ability to snap directly to some of these points. A way to check is that if it can get exported as what's called a DXF file type, which is an exchangeable drawing. Hopefully, sorry, my mic is like being all wonky, so hopefully you guys can hear literally anything I'm saying. But if it can get exported as a DXF file, then it can get imported into SketchUp, and the same thing then goes for exporting into like Illustrator or into AutoCAD. So if that is a file type available, when you go File, Export, so for example in SketchUp I can export as a 2D graphic, and then I can change what type of graphic I export to. And so we can see here that an AutoCAD drawing file, or a DWG, is something I can export to, as well as a DXF, which is that exchangeable file I was talking about. So if that is an option available for it, then it can get put vice versa. And so the same thing too is we could take our SketchUp drawings and we can export them into AutoCAD, so we can work kind of both ways depending on how we are trying to draw. Now, in some occasions, you may have your file coming from, and let me just undo all this, undo my import. There we go, I'm back to the beginning. Oh, hello there. When I did extensions, she's the only thing there. It really zoomed in. Is there might be something that I'm trying to reference for a drawing that I don't have a DXF file for, but I still just want to kind of reference it to not necessarily cheat, but be able to get some measurements or some looks from it without having to put too much effort in. So for example, if I wanted to model a piece of furniture and I wanted to do like a table that had like a live edge to it, I could find an image of one, so I just Googled live edge wood table, and it gave me some good examples, but I really wanted one that gave me a nice top view that I could easily kind of trace around. And so I found this one, and I saved the picture. And so then in SketchUp, I can again go File, Import, and I put it on my desktop here. And so I'm going to use it as an image, and I can just place it down and then scale it to whatever size I want it to be. I'm not going to worry about that too much because I could always scale it after the fact as well. And then I'm just going to set my view to directly above our top. I'm also going to change my camera to be in parallel perspective, so that way I don't have to worry about the perspective view. So if I have my camera set to parallel projection, then it's just looking directly from top. And I could use the line tool, or I can use this freehand tool as well to just kind of click. Well, I suppose with freehand I have to drag, which isn't ideal, but maybe also not the worst. And so I can drag my line over some of these endpoints, or just kind of around this edge. I would probably do it with the line tool itself, and then maybe even go through the line tool and the freehand tool as I go, because there are some of these lines that I do want to just be pretty straight. And then with the freehand tool, I'll just click and drag as best as I can. If I'm not directly on it, it's okay. I'm just kind of using it as that reference, like I said. And so I can click and drag to release it. Oops, I'm orbiting again. But I still know that this line is directly flat because it is coming up with that blue color, which means that it's a flat area. Boom. And then I'll go back into the line tool, and I'm just gonna connect those endpoints, and then I have kind of my outline of my object where I then can use the push-pull tool to make it three-dimensional. And then I can click on my reference image and just delete it after the fact. And I have kind of that little curve of that live edge. This can also be pretty helpful if maybe, you know, you find a reference of a layout of like a house that you want to use, but you don't want to draw it out all by yourself. You can just plop the image in there and you can trace around some of those walls. And when it comes to scaling it, so let's just find a picture of a floor plan so I can explain to you what I'm talking about. Here's a beautiful one. Oh, how great. Oh, the standard at Boone. That's kind of weird that that's like the first thing that popped up. Well, I guess it knows that I'm in Boone, but... And I'll save my picture to the desktop. And actually I wanted to keep that, whatever, for my next thing that I was going to go over. It's okay. I'll just find something else to help describe it. And I can import in the picture here. And once I place it, what I'll often do is draw a line in between a door. And so currently this door is reading as, and I can see in the bottom right corner, the door is currently 1 foot and we'll say 2 inches. And typically doors are 3 feet or 36 inches. And so for that, I'd break out a calculator and I would say the number that I want it to be divided by the number I have. So I want 36 inches and I currently have 14, which means I need to make this picture 2.5714 bigger than it currently is. And what I like to do is get a Post-it, write that number down somewhere, because no way am I remembering that. I don't have to write down every single decimal point. And then I'll go into the scale tool and I'm going to uniform scale it, so by one of the corners. And while I'm dragging that, I can type in the amount I want to scale by. Enter. And so now this door opening should be 3 feet, which it's a little bit bigger than 3 feet, but that's okay. And so now I could use the line tool to just kind of go around and trace this layout and know that it is full size. Now with this picture, since it's kind of blurry, I can't tell if this is a plumbing wall or not. I'm going to assume it is, and that's why it's that way. But I can kind of go around and trace all of my rooms and my walls. I typically, when I'm tracing like buildings like this, or if I'm doing something that traces a building, I like to go over doorways. So like I wouldn't just leave an opening there, I would just go all the way over it. The nice thing too is you get that pink line, that magenta line, to know that you're parallel. Oops, I orbited again. And then I can just kind of use this as a good reference without having to do a lot of that line work and layout. So especially if you were trying to do like a remodel of a building that already existed, maybe you don't have CAD files available for it, but you do have, you know, either an internet reference to look over, or maybe they have a picture of the layout. You can import it in here, and then just using those basic references of knowing like, okay, well, a door is typically 3 feet wide. Or if maybe you only have a view of like the outside, and it's a picture of the outside of the building, but the building has bricks on it. Well, the other thing that you typically know is that bricks are, you know, about 8 inches long. They're a little shorter due to the mortar joint. But even then, we can just add the mortar in with our little calculation, and you read the number that you have, and then you figure out what number do you want it to be, and then you divide the measurement you want divided by the measurement you currently have, and then you can scale your drawings so you can get a nice little reference. I'm not going to go trace this entire apartment because that will take way too much of your time and my time, but that's how you could do it. Eventually, once I go all the way around, these wall parts will fill in, and then I could just bring the walls up, and once I have that, then I can also just see where the doors are and relate it to their, and then add in the openings for like my doors and my windows. Some people, when they go trace everything around, they will just leave. So for example, and by some people I mean some of my students in my high school architecture class, they will just go trace the walls without tracing the opening. So like they'll leave when they get to like a door, they'll just go around the door, and then they'll add the door in later if that's what you'd like to do. Then by golly, do that. And so they will just go around and just only do the walls. So one issue with doing things this way is that maybe you're not going to get a consistent like thickness for walls like you would with the offset tool. But again, I wouldn't necessarily be using this for pure architectural drawings. I would be using this type of method more for like an interior design style. So like for instance, actually, do I have these walls at the same thickness? No, this wall is clearly, I drew it a little bit thicker. I could always move some of the walls around, some of the lines around. So I can like click on this line and I can use the move tool to move it in a little bit more, change maybe what that angle is. So you can always adjust things after the fact. You could just do just the outside and then use the offset tool to just bring it all in a consistent amount. So there's different ways you can approach it. It's just really that scaling it to the right size initially is always the hardest part. If there's a graphic scale on the drawing, then that becomes a fantastic reference to just be able to quickly just read what that graphic scale currently is and then adjust it to what you want it to be. But in this case, I didn't have a graphic scale, but I still was able to quickly scale it to the size I needed, so that way I could do what some people might call cheating, but I call that just working smarter. And then I'll highlight all of it and I'll get rid of it. Oh, another thing too is there are two different ways to highlight objects and get them. So if you click and go to the right, you get what's called a window selection, and if you go towards the left, you get what's called a cross selection, and this applies to AutoCAD as well. So when you get this solid window, it will only select things that are entirely inside your selection one. So like it's only going to select these lines because they were completely inside what I was selecting. It's not picking up the background picture, it's not clicking up any of these. If I go towards the left, I get a cross selection, and all it has to do is just barely touch what I was drawing. So even though this line was kind of just barely in it, it got selected because it was in that window I was drawing. So there's two kind of ways to just make selections maybe a little bit easier. And so that's how we can use just images or CAD files as a good reference for creating drawings. Now, another helpful thing that you can do in SketchUp is using Geo-Location or Google Maps. And so this is only available in the Pro version of SketchUp. So if you use the Make version or you're using the desktop version, you can't have access to it. But in the Pro version, you can use Geo-Location through Google Maps. And hopefully they haven't changed it too much since. Oh, welcome. Yeah, so part of some of the benefits for this is this thing right here where it says a shadow study. So if you say where your site is, it'll be able to put in different lighting effects for you. So it will show you how sunlight will affect your model. Revit does the same thing as well. And I've never used a shadow study in SketchUp before, but I'm assuming it does it just the same way Revit does it. But the thing that I really like is that it gets 3D sites if they're available. And so it can give you the terrain of your site and the different elevations of it and that topography very easily. And then we can actually import that 3D model of topography into a program like Revit and therefore not have to make our site in Revit. And so once we get into Revit, I'll kind of come back to SketchUp just for a brief moment to show you how you could do it. I'm not going to require you do it at all, but I just want you to see how it can be available. Continue to add location. And it looks like it has a help thing in here. Or so it says, yes. This would be the help button, I guess. So I can enter in a specific location. So I'm going to go to my favorite location ever, 300 Go Pioneers Drive, Boone. And here we are at Watauga High School, this stupid, ugly W. So remember what I said, how there's no way, there's no access at the end of halls. So I just don't like it. And we can apply a different region, and we can even move this so we can say, depending on what exactly our region is or how big our piece of property is. And I can import it in. Now I don't know if there's any 3D data available for here. So let's see. Oh yeah, so if I click on Show Terrain and I orbit around, it actually shows me three-dimensionally that, and this is actually super cool because it's showing right here that the high school is built on a hill, which it is. So the entrance is on the second floor over here. I currently, though, am on like the first floor. And so part of the first floor is in the ground, and the other part then lets out over here, so you can see kind of just the way the terrain might affect your building. And then we can export it as a 3D model. And I can't remember, I don't believe we do it as a 3D DWG. We either do it as an STL or an OBJ for Revit, but I'll get to that once we have to cross that bridge in Revit, because if I open up Revit right now, it'll probably freak some of you out, but I promise Revit is not a hard software. But we can export it as that 3D model and then use it to just kind of help make our site in that software that much easier. If we exported it to like an STL file, which I'll do, why not? It'll probably be a little big. We could even then open it up in like a 3D printing software, and then we could 3D print a model of the site. And therefore, we can even use that to 3D print out models of our ideas for designs and we can kind of see how they might interact with that site, which one looks better. Because the thing you always have to keep in mind when designing a piece of architecture is that the building does not exist in a vacuum. So this small building that we've been creating in our hand-drawn exercise and then in the SketchUp exercise as well, we were creating it pretty much as just, it's a two-room shed essentially, and we have no idea where it is. But depending on the site that it's going to be put on, which we'll think about more when we get into AutoCAD, that's going to have a play on how the building's oriented, how we clear the site, and how it looks and everything. And so I could then, in this 3D print, which it probably is this untitled thing here, yeah, which is a little big. So maybe let's scale it down to like 0.2. Because I have a pretty big print bed here, but that was still a little large for me. And well, I guess we can make it 2%, or 2% still too big, because it was making it full size, and you know, in reality, one thing we're having as an issue here is that it exported it as a kind of three-dimensional face, so it still has no thickness to it. So that's just something we would have to play around with in here to just kind of create almost like a ground model of it, but we now have at least that slope that we can kind of play around with. We could print it out, we can export it in, like I said, model it around, get a lot more different pieces of ideas that we can then work with too. And in Revit too, we can also export to a 3D print, so we can test out designs in softwares like Revit and export it. We could take, so I could take this model here of this SketchUp practice, which it's going to update to open in here now that I just realized that. But I could take this small building and I could, uh-oh, it's doing the glitch. And I could export this into a 3D model and 3D print it. And so when we were doing the hand drawings, I had that 3D model of the section view. I didn't draw that out in any other software. I just made it in, well, in that case, I made it in Revit, and then I was able to just 3D print it. And it's just a little bit of an easier way to make some models and make some really cool, interesting models. Yeah, I think 3D printers are really cool. Laser cutters are also great for making architectural models too. Now, the last thing kind of that I wanted to show you of another kind of practical use of SketchUp is that you get this 3D model. It's really great, but it's not all too wonderful for doing like a presentation to anyone, because then you'd have to open it up and constantly like orbit it around and say, hold on, wait, let me put this section plane up, and then let me, you know, take this section plane and move it inward. Like, that's not really all that extremely helpful for a presentation. It's great for you and your understanding of the model and for you and your construction of the model, but it's not ideal for presenting it to a client or maybe presenting it in class. And so for that, we can use things like, no, let's not say practice, things like scenes and the layout tools. So the layout tool is only available in that Pro version, which, by the way, I know some of you guys might have already realized this when you went to go download it, but if you do want the Pro version at home, you can, with the higher education one, you can get it for $55 a year. So you can get it at a pretty hefty discount. I know not everybody wants to pay money for it to have it on there. The pro version is available in Udesk, so you do have that pro version there. But I know for some of you guys, my microphone keeps moving, so if I'm unable to be heard, I apologize. Depending on how horrible it is, I might refilm this. But yeah, $55 to some of us, that's a lot of money. To me, that's not exactly enough that I would, or a small enough amount that I would just say, oh yeah, $55, sure, whatever. But in my opinion, I think $55 may be worth it, but that's ultimately up to you to buy the pro version. But what scenes are is I have up here a couple of different like tabs made. And so I have my 3D model of this little greenhouse that we were working on as a class along with the agricultural teacher. We were working on this pre-COVID, and then kind of a wrench got thrown in our plans. And so we've got the 3D model, but then we have these different tabs up here which kind of go to different scenes. The students really liked this one as just like a cool picture. They thought it looks cool. But it also has these just 2D line work that we then can build everything off of, put dimensions off of. So we've got for, you know, each wall. I personally don't like the animations too much, but I can see the value in them if for a different project, if maybe I was going from one room to another room. For something like this where we were just going over framing stuff, I think they're a little bit much. But we can see kind of just different parts, and that's just because other parts are hidden in it. So what's going on here with our scenes is located in this toolbar on the side. So you can add in multiple scenes, and that's what we just have them all defined with like different names and different styles. And just depending on which scene we were in or like which wall we wanted to describe, we just highlighted parts and then said hide them and made them go bye-bye. So if it wasn't something that we wanted to focus on, we just made it disappear. So this way it was still there. We still had the complete 3D model, but just in that one form or in that one view, it was gone. And then we would set our view based on, so maybe if we wanted just like a layout of this way of just kind of what it would look like, we would set our view based on one of the orthographics. Then in our styles, that's where we got kind of just the simple line work. And so there's lots of different styles out there. There's ones to make it look like it's a hand-drawn sketch. So you can kind of make it look more hand-drawn. You can make it look like it's on a different piece of paper. You can make it look like it's stained for some bizarre reason. I wasn't 100% sure why they chose that one, but you know what? As a teacher, I'm just here to make the kids happy. And you can play around with like different colors too for necessarily how your 3D model layout looks. But really then for like finishing up a drawing, I just want like these straight lines, and I can make lines thicker as I go or kind of thinner. And then usually too, turning the shadows all the way off is always a good idea. And so you can either just move that slider all the way or just say like, hey, don't show shadows. Like I just don't want them. And then to add this as a scene in here, we can click on Add Scene. And then I can right click on it, rename, and I can call it, you know, floor plan layout. Whoops, I put a little slash there, but that's okay. You can move them up and down in this too, so let me just close out the styles and the entity info and the shadows, so this is just a little bit bigger. So like if I wanted this floor plan layout to be further down the line, I can just move it down. That really isn't too important necessarily, at least in my opinion. You can turn that animation off as well. So like going to floor plan layout shouldn't have an animation, but apparently it still does. Don't know why. And you can get rid of some of the properties as well. But ultimately we really don't, or within my class we really didn't touch a lot of this stuff too much. Then once you have these scenes laid out, like while it flipping around and everything is real fun and cool to watch, but maybe like for this one I don't want any shadows showing there, I just want just the line work. I've got this section plane in the background, excuse me, maybe I want to hide it so that way it's gone. And this is kind of just setting up what are my, like what would my drawings or my plans kind of look like for giving this over to our construction teacher so then his students could go build it. And there is some issues with the line work, how it gets exported. Like, is it all 1000% perfect depending on the scale we have it at? No. But once I put it in the layout tool, we can get it to be kind of more perfect. And so with that, I would go into File, Send to Layout, and it's telling me I have to save it first, so that's fine, I'll save it. And so again, layout is only available in the Pro version. You cannot use the layout tool in Make, and I am 90% sure you can't use it in the web version either. But this is kind of like, once we get into AutoCAD, this is essentially the same as like Paperspace in AutoCAD. So this is getting a piece of paper ready for our drawing. And so we can choose to lay it out on sheets of graph paper or regular paper. And so like this would be a sheet of 11 by 17 regular paper. And it put my drawing down. Now I can move it around. I can shrink it. I can also just change its scale right here. So I can say, you know, like I want it to be 1/4 inch equals a foot for the page, and I can move it. I believe what I'm curious about is if shrinking this shrinks just the viewport, correct? Not my drawing. Sweet, that's what I thought. With layout, because we're no longer using 3-dimensional abilities either, like so just holding down your scroll wheel is the pan tool. I can't 3D orbit anymore because now I'm in a 2D layout. If there was anything extra that I wanted to add on here, so like maybe how some of my line work didn't come in great, I can go into the pencil tool and I can like add in some lines and details that maybe didn't come in exactly how I wanted them to. So for example, like this little edge just at this scale didn't come in. I can just start kind of adding in different lines and stuff. I can also add in multiple views. So for example, let me just pan over and I'll go back into the select tool. If I click on this view and I Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and then move it, I now have 2 versions of this wall. And what I can do now is just in this new one, change what scene it's looking at. And so I could say, well, it's just looking at the complete version. in this one, I'm going to change the scale to be a little bit smaller, but maybe also like I want this view to be a little bit bigger, just because this is kind of the 3D assembly. Oh no, that rotates me around. I don't want to do that. Ooh, if I uncheck preserve scale, that means then when I size it up, it'll just move along with it. Okay, that's good. That's interesting. And it's kind of what I wanted it to do. And I can move it around. I could add in different pieces of text. I could add in title blocks. And so through here, I can add text. I can add different labels or leaders. I can add in dimensions as well. And I could do this in the regular model space or in the regular SketchUp version. I can use the dimension tool to add in my dimensions that says, you know, it's 11 feet this way. But I can also do the same thing in here. Why is it not? There we go. Well, I don't know why now it's saying that it's 11 and 9/32, but that's okay. Because we can also double click on that and we should be able to change the text box. Aha, yep. So I can just change it to say 11 feet if I just double click on it. In a strategy I called faking it till you make it. So I can put in kind of these different 2D patterns. It also has these little scrapbook arrows here, which I kind of have always liked. So I can like drag this in here and move it around and rotate it maybe to show like, oh, well that didn't do what I wanted. But I can say, you know, like that turns into, and then I'll copy and paste, so Control C, Control V, just to get a new viewport open. And then change this to be, let's see, oh yeah, scroll up to SketchUp model, to like just the roof assembly. It looks like the preserve scale thing is still on. And so I can kind of just show how that comes into the roof assembly, and then I could even have like my roof rafters guidelines here. So I can kind of make a little bit of a storyboard about how the different parts come together, or maybe have a floor plan with my, you know, kitchen layout or my furniture design, and then have a couple of different pieces of furniture laid out here just to kind of help show it, or maybe, you know, have my color board over there to show the different colors that are going to be featured in there. So the layout tool can be a pretty beneficial tool. I haven't used it a whole lot. Like I said, we were playing around with it quite a bit in my architecture class last spring, and we were getting really good with stuff, and then just the story of everyone's life, COVID hit, and so I kind of stopped using it too much just because I didn't have time to play around with it, and this was really supposed to be more of a student project than a me thing. But it can be a pretty good tool once you start to get a good use of it. I like SketchUp a lot for just making framing models. I use it heavily for that. I don't teach interior design this semester, so that's why I don't use it a lot for that, but supposedly I have a high school interior design class next semester, or that's what I've been told. So I would then be doing a little bit more SketchUp with that, but SketchUp is a pretty nifty neat tool that has a lot of integrated capabilities to work very well with software like Revit and AutoCAD. And to me, it kind of just helps really show that none of these software by themselves is the best one to use. They kind of all have their own uses and their own benefits for whatever you may need them for. And as I said, this is a shorter lecture / demo of just some other features and benefits of how you can be using SketchUp to your advantage. And without further ado, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for watching.